Hello there. Maybe like me, you're thinking that the conference industry is at something of a tipping point right now. And by that, I mean moving towards a long-term future where we will see a rise and rise and rise again of online conferences, rather than online conferences being something of a stopgap during this crazy time of lockdown. If that's the case, then I think it's very important that we get our terminology right at the start because, well, that's going to help shape the evolution of online conferences. In particular, I'd like to draw a distinction between online conferences and virtual conferences. Now, that might just seem like semantics, and about a week ago, I would have agreed with you. A couple of days ago, I had a 20-minute conversation with my colleague Lee Jackson about this very issue. If you've got nothing better to do for the next 20 minutes, take a look. Tell me what you think. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Am I barking up a wrong tree? I guess time's going to tell either way, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. So for now, enjoy the conversation.
I wanted to have a conversation with you, Lee, based on some thoughts I've been having over the last few days, particularly since you run your Agency Transformation Live conference and have developed Event Engine to create what we've been calling a virtual event platform. And there's been something niggling away at me about just the term virtual, because I don't think it's adequate. Virtual meaning almost. I'm virtually there, and I mean we're used to it now. We kind of, it is synonymous with digital, so we think of virtual reality, but even that is from the literal term virtual, which is, well, it's not quite reality. It's almost reality, whereas in fact it is actually reality. It's just a different form of reality. If you're in a virtual reality game, there's nothing unreal about that game. The images are real, the sensations you feel are very real. So I mean, we could go down a philosophical rabbit hole, but I don't want to. I'm not. We don't need to.
No.
The fact is, it is real. And
do you mean it's real because of the experience, as opposed to it's real because of the pixels in front of your eyes? Because that's what I'm trying to work out.
What I mean is, it's real because it is actually something. It exists.
Yeah.
You can't say it doesn't exist just because. So, well, someone might say, well, you know, it's just an image of something. Well, an image exists. If you have a blank sheet of paper and you draw something on it, that something is real. It actually exists. Now, if you draw a tomato, it doesn't mean it is a real tomato, but it is actually, it is very real. This isn't just a conversation about the philosophy of reality. What I want to talk about is, what are we doing when we think virtual event? Because I believe that the events industry is at a tipping point. I just don't know how many of us are aware quite how much of a tipping point it's at to be able to give it a shove and see digital go where digital will be. Now, it's easy to think maybe like in 100 years from now that I mean, I can imagine that physical meetups will never end. But if you do go to a physical meetup in the future, how different will they look to physical meetups now? So if you're, let's say, at a conference and there's a stage of the panel, will we be surprised if in 100 years from now that all the panel members are made up of holograms of people all around the world, for example?
I wouldn't be surprised. I'm just thinking of every other science fiction movie I've seen,
right,
where that happens, including Star Trek.
We're at the beginnings of seeing hologram technology now. If you think futuristically, you can sort of, well, either dreaming it or by looking at futuristic Star Trek and other things, get an idea of what meetups might look like in the future. So probably a hybrid of people physically in a location with using technology to bring people from all over the world, pipe them in so they can talk live and interact as though they are there, but they're not actually physically well, they are actually really there. If the reality is I am talking to you, so the reality is you and I are now in a meeting but in two different geolocations right now.
A good movie to reference this would be Ready Player One, where they're all meeting but in a virtual world, but it looks and feels as physical and real as possible. Now that would be pretty awesome.
So that brings me to the term virtual event. It can be limiting. If we're talking about virtually recreating a physical event in a digital platform, knowing that the biggest limitation of physical events is the fact that they are physical. So if you have a physical event in, let's say, San Francisco, and it's an international event, well, you're limiting the people who can't get to San Francisco from benefiting from that event. Obviously, digital completely breaks down all those barriers. So if we're starting with the premise of let's virtually recreate a physical event in a digital environment, you're already coming from a standpoint of limitation. When Henry Ford started making the car for the masses, cars were already around.
Yeah.
But so were horses. The mass population used horses and cars. The industry that says let's recreate digital events on the premise of let's try and recreate physical event experiences within a digital platform would be similar to Henry Ford saying, right, we're going to create for the masses a motor car, and the cars really need to resemble a horse.
Because if you look as well at those particular, the very first models of cars, they looked very much like a horse and like a carriage, didn't they? And they would call them the horseless carriages. And then he recognized that actually they could take this to the masses by dramatically reducing the cost. Thus, it wasn't the prerogative of the people who can only afford to get to San Francisco for the event, as it were. He's made it accessible to the regular family. And in fact, he very much focused on paying his staff a decent salary and wanted to ensure that his staff could afford the car that they made. And if his team could, that meant, in theory, the masses was more achievable or more accessible to the masses. I think that's the direction you're going. So we have a physical event which has the limitations of its location, whilst the benefits of its location at the same time. But equally, a virtual or a digital event is still an event. It's not almost, but not quite. It is actually an event. It happens to be in a digital environment, i.e., it's another version of what exists. There's the horse and carriage in the car. There's the physical event. There's the online event or the digital event. The beauty, I'm guessing you're getting at here, is the digital event breaks down all of those barriers and takes location out of the equation and still allows you to create an event that is real.
Yeah,
it
absolutely.
just happens to use the technology of the time, i.e., the internet, etc.
Yeah. Well, for me, the beauty is even bigger than that. It's if we can get rid of the framework that we will have in our thinking to say we need to replicate physical features in a digital environment, then we can free up digital to be all it can be. And that's the way that digital platform experiences will evolve. They're not going to evolve very quickly, or possibly even in the right direction, if we approach them with the mindset of replicating something that's physical.
So the other day, we had this conversation, didn't we, as well, where we'd noticed that a lot of people were trying to create almost game-like experiences for events, and that actually would be a blocker to people trying to experience that event or that digital event. Yeah. And the way I went with Agency Transformation Live was to actually make it so that you would land on a web page and you would click on a button that says table 1, and you would go and visit your table 1, and that would just simply be a very similar layout to Zoom with a chat window. So I was really, really worried, in fact, that I should have been trying to, yeah, exactly. I was worried that I should have been trying to recreate the physical by creating 3D environments, by creating this fake venue. I'd got quotes for 3D walkarounds. I'd got quotes for doing like room plans of these like digital rooms, etc. Because I'd had a physical event and I was so conscious that I needed to maybe somehow replicate that online. But then, you know, I was forced, because of the finances, it was just too ridiculously expensive to do all that. I was therefore forced to go simple, and felt like a fraud for, you know, at least the first half an hour, until I was seeing how people were interacting on the platform, and until I saw all the responses that we had after. I mean, you've seen tons of amazing testimonials where people said, holy moly, that was the most exciting, the best online event. They didn't even say virtual. They were saying online event I have ever attended. And we had people from all around the world staying up at ridiculous hours because they didn't actually want to leave, because they were having too much fun with people. But I had fallen into that trap of considering my event as a virtual, almost but not quite representation of what I'd been doing physically. And I therefore felt the pressure of trying to recreate the physical in the digital. But that, I believe, actually in hindsight would have inhibited what we actually ended up achieving, thankfully, because it was cost prohibitive to try and recreate that kind of walk around experience. So we were forced to go simple, and actually that worked so well.
It really did. It was incredible. And I mean, your hand was forced due to, well, I know it was the cost constraints and time as well, because your event was happening very shortly after.
We had a month turnaround. Lockdown was announced, and I had to, well, actually, we made the decision just before lockdown because we figured it was going to happen. But we had a month before our event.
Having your hand forced was very much a blessing in disguise. See, what I think is going on with lockdown is it's forcing, or it's sort of shunting along very quickly the evolution of digital event platforms. I'm just not quite sure that we've all cottoned on to the fact just yet. And because I think we're both still hearing a lot of noise about replicating the physical, whereas what you ended up doing was building your digital stage on the basis of outcomes and objectives. And there's nothing new and revolutionary in that. We've all been to the strategic meetings and read the Malcolm Gladwell books and Simon Sinek books about.
I've not read Malcolm Gladwell's book. Simon Sinek, I'll give you that.
It almost feels as though many of our industry comrades have forgotten about why do we do this? Why are we here? If like a year ago, if you'd stuck a load of conference and event marketers, managers, organizers in a room and said, what are you actually delivering? None of them would have said, we deliver physical events. They would have said, we deliver outcomes and objective-based experiences for businesses in all kinds of industries. Nothing's changed in that regard, except now I think the probably because of fear, because, well, this is all we know, or we've known, the outworking of meeting those business objectives has always been, we deliver a physical event. And sure, digital has made its way into the picture, but it's really been shoved front and center now into the picture. And we're all still figuring out like how to drive that, how to steer it, which direction we're going to take this in. And what I think we have done with Event Engine's platform is to, well, the shackles are off that. And I think that they've come off without us necessarily realizing that they're off, but we are unshackled with regards to thinking it needs to be confined by the parameters of the old.
So I can make sure I've understood what you're saying, and this makes sense to me. I want to kind of connect it to your original example of Henry Ford. So we've got the carriage with a horse, and it would have made no sense for them to create a car which had some sort of big fake horse on the front, or to create a car that had horse legs, etc. It made the most sense to create a car that had rubber wheels, didn't need anything else on the front, was slimline, and would allow people to sit in it safely and progress down the road at a blistering 4 miles an hour or whatever it was that they would do. I think he hit 20 miles an hour, actually, Henry Ford, with the Ford Model 6 or whatever it was. Now, let's go to my event. And I was originally approaching it as a replicating the old, as it were, replicating what had been before in an online environment, and that was starting to stress me out. So we had a conversation, and we did that objective conversation to say, right, what do we want out of this? What happened last year that was the most powerful part of our event, which made everybody, we had 50% rebook on the last day of the event. 50% of the audience at the physical events booked for the following year. So why did they do that, and what compelled them to do that? And it was because of community. It was because of making friends. It was because of networking. It was because of creating partnerships, and some really exciting businesses were launched last year because of our event. And I realized they were the most important things. That's what people had rocked up. So just like the car, Henry Ford realized that people just want to get from A to B. So however you do that, it don't matter. As long as they're getting from A to B in a safe way, then he doesn't need to replicate the old in that insane way or in that insane detail. And neither did I with my event. As long as I can create a platform that facilitates those objectives, that connection, the community, the networking, the business ideas, all of that sort of stuff, then it does not matter how I present that online, as long as it meets those particular objectives.
And similarly, in if you said you read Cynic, so you remember he talks about how the old railroads in when early America was transferring west. I mean, these guys were revolutionaries who did the impossible and blasted through mountains and managed to get a train track through and over the Rockies to link up transportation from east to west. And they all disappeared because someone invented the airplane. They didn't see themselves as agents of transportation. They saw themselves as agents of train transportation.
Yeah.
Maybe there was a board member back then who saw airplanes and saw the potential of it, but couldn't figure out how to make an airplane look like a train, and therefore it didn't get anywhere.
Yeah, that's true.
Because people are used to traveling on a train. They're not used to getting on this newfangled thing called an airplane. It's weird and it's dangerous, and who knows.
I think what you're getting at there as well is that often we become defined by our activity and those things that we do, rather than the outcomes or the things that we achieve and the things we achieve for other people. So again, the train company are getting people from A to B. So it shouldn't matter how they do that. They could have invested in cars, they could have invested in planes and in trains, etc. And however, we kind of become focused on, this is the way that we do this. This is the way that we produce our events. This is the way we organize our events. It's the way it's always been, and it works really well. And these are the worst times ever because we can't do this anymore. How do we replicate this digitally, or should we just close shop? And we would be in danger as event organizers of being like those the CEOs of those train companies. How do we make our train look like an aeroplane, or how can we compete with the aeroplane by making our trains faster in some way and even more luxurious and more comfortable, and what can we do to make it better? How much money can we throw at this train line to somehow make it more attractive than the really fast aeroplane? And we would be in danger, I think, of as event organizers, because the other fear I think we've got as well is just like the fear with the guys back then with the trains and the airplanes coming along. Right now, as physical event organizers, I've experienced this fear of, will digital events harm my physical events in the future? But also, how long is this going to go on? Because there has been talks of lockdowns or mini lockdowns, etc., or things, or of a new normal, and I don't even know what this new normal is going to look like. So there is a heck of a lot of uncertainty around me. So it kind of encourages me to protect my events business and to ensure that I can serve my community for years to come throughout whatever is going to happen.
Yeah.
It makes sense for me to kind of immerse myself in this digital culture and understand how I can deliver the outcomes in a digital environment. And the moment I can open up the doors of a venue and get everyone physically together, holy moly, I can't wait to do that. But at least I've survived throughout this time.
I mean, what we haven't really covered is, well, what does sky's the limit look like then? And the answer, of course, is, well, we don't really know. But I mean, one thing, for example, could be that we tend to one of the parameters of a physical event is that they're very time sensitive. So they're 1 day, 3 day, 5 day long events. The objectives within those things remain pretty much constant throughout: information sharing, networking, collaborating, workshops.
Free swag.
Bit of swag, yeah. With a digital platform, does it need to happen within a 3 or 5 day period? Maybe we'll start seeing the rise of month-long conferences, which aren't necessarily then called conferences. Maybe we'll call them something else. But rather than having day-long events, maybe it's 2 week, 1 month, 6 month long events, which are on for about an hour a day. It'll be very interesting to see how it evolves, but I think it really should evolve. And I think it stands the most chance of evolving for the benefit of the entire industry if we agree to shed off the parameters that we just don't need to have.
From my digital event, one of the things I've learned is that will actually impact how I do a physical event next year, as long as I'm allowed to. We've already got our location penciled in, etc. But it forced me as a digital event to focus on what is the most important thing to our attendees and to our sponsors, etc. And I can now put that into my physical event and make those even more of a priority. Just small things like encouraging people to network at their tables with the strangers that they've been assigned to, actually assigning people to tables in a conference at random so they're forced to meet people, because last year people just gravitated towards people that they kind of knew. Whereas this year everyone met someone new because we kind of enforced it. So just small subtle things like that to facilitate serendipity in the physical as well as in the digital. There are so much that can be learned by pursuing this. So during these times, again, as stressful as they may be, there is so much that we can learn and that we can apply, and physical may never look the same again. I think community is definitely something that is right up there. Once a 5-day event that you mentioned might have been all about consuming as much information and going to visit as many people, many stands as you could at, say, an exhibition, etc. And maybe that's going to shift, and physical events will be predominantly more focused on conversation and building community and relaxing together and learning together and all that sort of stuff, because we've all been forced apart for weeks on end. So I'm intrigued.
Me too. Well, watch this space, see what happens.
Watch this space. All right. Cheerio.
Cheers.